Welcome to what I believe is probably one of the most powerful Bamboocut DPS builds out there in Where Winds Meet. I currently have about 150 hours of playing this build and just testing out a few different things, and I've also spoken with a handful of Chinese players that have played this game for thousands of hours and compiled all of that feedback and tested things out and put it all into one video where you can get a better understanding of how this build works and replicate it for yourselves. I'm talking about everything you need to know, ranging from inner ways, mystic skills, gear sets, and of course, rotations. I'll also be talking about useful consumables and just best practices to get the most out of this build. I will call out straightforward that this is more so focused on the PvE side of things, because if you are focused on the PvP side, then we would be mixing some of these mystic skills out for other options. But again, with that being said, let's just go ahead and start jumping into some of the specifics. The best way to actually learn this build is for me to first explain how the combos work, and then I'll show you exactly how it all comes together. So to start things off, we start each battle with the Mortal Rope Dart, and typically we'll approach the boss or enemy with the charging stance. All we really need for this is to be in this stance for 1.5 seconds because we want the enhanced special skill, which is Rodent Rampage. This allows additional rodents to pop up, deal more damage, and that's what this build is all about, just dishing off as much damage as fast as possible. In the only case that I have used this charging stance for more than 1.5 seconds is if there's 2 or 3 stages within a certain boss fight and I'm low on health. Sometimes I'll hold the stance a little bit longer just to restore some health and some energy, but again, in most cases you really won't be using this other than as you approach the boss or the enemy for the very first time. Once this is charged, you'll see a little kind of glowing icon on your character indicating that you have the buff. I'll show you right there. There you go, right there. And once that happens, you're ready to open the battle up with the Blade-Bound Thread. This closes the gap between you and the enemy, gets you close to them, and also applies a Vendetta token on the target. When the rodents that you have attack the target with this token, they deal increased damage and also restores some token of gratitude, which is a win-win situation and helps your damage output. So, you use the charge stance, you use this to kind of close the gap and apply the Vendetta token, and then you want to apply 2 of these rodent rampages as quickly as possible. As soon as these rodent rampages are applied, that's where we swap over to the Infernal Twinblades and start light attacking. As you start light attacking, you are going to see that the rodents are popping up. There's tons and tons of passive damage on top of your actual light attack damage, and you can mix and match between light attacks and this Addled Mind right here in order to store the flame lash meter as much as possible. This is indicated by a red sword right above your weapon in the lower right corner. You'll see that soon. And once that's full, you should activate it and start light attacking like crazy. Your light attacks are going to deal tons of damage, especially with this inner way, Echoes of Oblivion. It all stacks together and deals major damage. Realistically, I don't even really touch this special skill for the Infernal Twinblades that much. Sometimes I will as I am stacking tons and tons of this meter for Flame Lash, but in most cases I really won't use it. Again, it's useful in some ways in order to kind of reduce the cooldown for Addled Mind, but for the most part I'm really light attacking with my Twin Blades because I tend to get the most of my damage from simply doing light attacks. After the Flame Lash meter is depleted, I then tend to use my special Mystic skill and then repeat the process back with the Mortal Rope Dart, but starting with the Blade-Bound Thread. It's not worth doing this other than the fact of when you approach the boss for the first time, simply because it takes time, and good luck if you try to do this in the middle of the fight because you're just going to get slammed. So with that being said, let's just jump into an actual visual of how this all looks and comes together. So first things first, we start with this charging attack, Rodent's Resilience, for 1.5 seconds. Once I get that proc, I use Blade-Bound Thread and close the gap and apply the Vendetta token, and then I spam Rodent Rampage twice. As soon as I spam it twice, and it might take a second, you swap to the Infernal Blades and start using light attacks and Aided Mind. In the lower right corner, you're going to see that little red bar slowly fill up. What we're trying to do here is fill that up as quickly as possible, and then we're going to apply Flame Lash. This gives us a major damage boost, and we're going to dish off as many light attacks as possible. After that depletes, use your Soaring Spin or your Mystic skill of choice, and then rinse and repeat the process. Again, the whole goal of this is to try to apply Rodin's Rampage as much as possible, because all of that passive damage really builds up. And again, you're going to rinse and repeat all of these steps except for that Rodin's Resilience, just because that takes a little bit too much time. Also, each battle is situational, so a helpful tip too is to realize that Aided Mind can actually help crowd control certain boss abilities, like this one right here. As soon as I use it, the boss stops using his ability and I can continue my light attacks and charging and getting ready for Flame Lash. Before jumping into gear sets, inner ways, and mystic skills, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed this video so far. It really does help me out and tells me it's worth creating content kind of like this one, and tells me that, hey, you guys actually like it. So with that being said, let's jump into the next part of the build. Now when it comes to your inner ways, what I like to use is Moral Chant, Echoes of Oblivion, Vendetta, and Fivefold Bleed. I've played around between Fivefold Bleed and the poison related perk, Bitter Seasons, and personally I'm a fan of Fivefold Bleed. However, down the road, it sounds like Moral Chant isn't as good as it is in the early game. Again, this is an amazing perk. I'm not saying don't use it, but I'm saying it might be worth playing around and swapping it out towards the late game once all of these other inner ways are upgraded quite a bit, because it could potentially be swapped out for Breaking Point or even Bitter Seasons, especially when it comes to PvP related content. So again, you can mix and match however you really want between those 5 or 6 inner ways for the most part, but you really want Echoes of Oblivion and Vendetta 100%. And then on top of that, Moral Chant for sure if you are on the global server, because this is just amazing. But again, once we eventually get to the late game, that might open up more opportunities to kind of mix and match that with Bitter Seasons or Breaking Point. And then of course, Fivefold Bleed is also amazing. At all times, you're going to want to try to make sure you can upgrade these as much as possible, because as you upgrade them, additional stats, including passive stats, are added and they all really work together. Even this Vendetta one right here, it applies Bamboocut attack, which also impacts my overall Infernal Twinblade attack damage. So again, it all works together and it comes together to dish off as much damage as possible. Now, if we're talking about the actual mystic skills, the one I tend to use the most when it comes to the combo I highlighted earlier is Soaring Spin. It just deals a ton of burst damage and also has a follow-up strike. As you upgrade it, this overall damage just continues to increase. You can kind of see examples of that right here, but also kind of can be used as a gap closer in some cases, depending on your positioning. So I do tend to use this quite a bit. Again, every boss battle is going to be very situational too. So I did want to call out Guardian Palm. It's interesting because there is a kind of like special iteration of Guardian Palm, and there's a way you can actually cheese it so you get the upgraded version of it every single time. Just to show you guys, if you just double jump, slam down, and then actually use the Mystic skill, that is what hits the height requirement. So I'll show you guys right here. Double jump, Q, and use it. There you go. There's the special ability. So you can rinse and repeat that during boss battles. It's pretty helpful too, because you can use that at the right time to actually avoid certain attacks as well. And just to show you, that's very different from the typical one like this, and the overall damage output is not as strong. So if you jump back into it, you can play around with other mystic skills and combos. For example, Dragon's Breath into Drunken Poet is also amazing. I like using Celestial Seas a lot, especially in boss battles. I don't think a lot of people tend to actually use this mystic skill correctly. It even calls out that in combat it can be used to disarm certain enemies, like enemies with shields and stuff like that, and also counterattack with their own weapons. So a lot of bosses that you'll face actually have certain charged attacks, and some of them can actually be disarmed with Celestial Seas. So make sure you kind of play around with that as well. Look online for some boss guides because they do tend to call that out as well. In large scale PvE content, I do also like to use Ghostbind and then jump that into like an additional Guardian Palm, just because they'll be frozen in place. This is just great for a ton of mobs all at once, but again, it's a unique situation. But ultimately, that's kind of how I use my mystic skills, but it is open to interpretation based on the whole situation that you're in. And again, this is PvP oriented. If we are talking about PvP, we are going to use a whole handful of different mystic skills, honestly, including Talon Strike and a few other ones. But again, this is PvE oriented, so this is kind of how I set mine up and kind of play around with. Now, if we take a closer look at actual gear sets and what you should aim for, I have two recommendations when it comes to the gear set that you use for like your weapons and accessories. The first one, especially in the early game, I think Swallow Call is probably one of the #1 recommended ones to go for. It's just nice additional damage to your light attacks, which again is a major part of the rotation, and it also deals some extra damage when the foe is actually exhausted, which is also great because we're in Flame Lash state and it all builds up together for some great burst damage. The other set, which I'm actually starting to work a little bit more towards, is the Hawking set, which I think I'm going to eventually transition to once I get all the pieces in order. And it calls out that whenever any of your damage triggers affinity, you gain Hawking, which increases physical attack by 2% for 5 seconds, and it can stack up to 5 times. So in many cases, there's a chance that we can get 10% additional physical attack at all times, which is great because it's not limiting only to light attacks. It's impacting all of like the special attacks and mystic skills and everything else in between, as long as it's in the physical attack category. So again, I think overall damage output will technically be a little bit higher with the Hawking set, but again, ultimately I recommend both the Swallow Call and the Hawking for this type of build. When it comes to the actual equipment for your armor pieces, again, I tend to use Calm Waters because we're earlier in the game and it's not as major, but again, I'm not sure how many of you guys actually dodge compared to parry. I tend to parry a lot more than I dodge, so eventually I'm going to transition away from Calm Waters and take a closer look at some of these other options here. A lot of players in the Chinese server tend to use Beyond the Chill set, it seems like, for this build. Essentially, if you take no damage for 10 seconds, you gain this unique buff called Beyond the Chill, and it reduces the next damage you take and all damage taken after that for 2 seconds by 40%. And it just seems like it can be a nice safety net in case you do get hit. Again, I just don't dodge that much compared to parry, so I don't think I prefer Calm Waters once we actually get to the end game. But again, you can play around with a handful of these different kind of options here. I know some people like to use Eagle Rise as well, but you can mix and match and really make it your own. When it comes to actually tuning your gear too, I highly recommend you go for physical attack in most cases because that impacts more of your actual damage output. And then also Bamboocut attack if you can. I like to apply affinity rate on my armor pieces as well as much as possible, especially if I'm using the Hawking set, because the affinity rate is going to help me apply these stacks, which will lead to increased physical attack faster and more often, which is a win-win situation. If you are lucky enough to actually get this special right here, this special perk here on your armor pieces, it's ideal as well. It increases the rodent damage that your rodents actually dish off, which is a major part of this build. Again, the goal for this build is to really have your rodents passively dishing off damage non-stop. And the more you have of this perk on your armor pieces, the more damage it's just going to continuously build over time, and your enemies are just going to melt. So again, there's lots of just different iterations that you can actually have with your build. I am nowhere near kind of like the ideal pieces yet, as you can see. But again, I'm kind of saving a lot of my special tuning items until the late game, so I can actually use them quite a bit to really make perfect weapons and try to get the ideal set for packing even a harder punch. And a few last minute tips and tricks to make this build punch even harder is that I first recommend that you actually go to your develop tab, go to gear, and make sure you invest in your Divinecrafts, specifically the Poison Divinecraft. You're going to want to pick up on as much bonus damage as possible, and as you progress this Divinecraft, you're going to pick up more and more benefits that'll help you dish off more damage over time, which is great. Also, before entering like intense fights, make sure you go to settings, game, scroll all the way down, and then enable auto use for your Divinecraft tool. This will essentially make sure that you are automatically using your Divinecraft, whether it's poison, fire, or this aqua wax. It just speeds up everything and just dishes off even more damage over time, so it's a win-win situation. And then last but not least, I do want to call out too that there are a handful of consumables, whether it's like a script or even food, that will give you additional benefits on the battlefield. Sometimes it's higher endurance regen, sometimes it's dodge endurance, sometimes there's even physical attack boosts. Right here, increases physical attack by 20 to 40 for 30 minutes, which again is major. Just keep in mind that some certain foods and scripts are not able to be used during trials. But again, a lot of these are very, very helpful and could be the difference between a win or a loss during some of these battles. So keep that in mind as well. But that really covers it. If you guys enjoyed this video, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. I hope it was helpful. I haven't seen a ton of builds out here really break things down piece by piece. So I'm hoping this fills the gap and kind of share some more information about how you can be successful with a build like this, and how each of the two weapons really work together to dish off major damage. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you guys later.